So in this video we're going to look at the ribbon. Now, as I covered last video, the ribbon is part of the user interface for Revit 2020 and we're using the default install of Revit 2020 for New Zealand. The ribbon itself, as I described last video, is this section up the top here, consisting of a whole lot of tabs and some icons underneath. And also it includes this little piece along the bottom that currently is blank, but will populate as we change our way through the ribbon. So if we just click on the first tab in the ribbon, which is architecture, we can see again we have these tabs across the top. Now, these tabs group icons into a way that creates a workflow within Revit. So you can see here we're in the architecture tab, and currently the icons and tools that we have available generally relate to construction of the model or altering the model within Revit. You'll see each panel within the ribbon is also further split up into smaller subsections. In this case we have build. This relates to the tools that are in the build section of the ribbon, which is here. And we have circulation here, and these tools in that little subsection relate to circulation spaces, stairs and ramps, etc. So we have the ribbon split up into smaller pieces, and you'll see the benefits of that a little bit later when we start to customize the ribbon. But it also helps us define tools by understanding that all the room and area tools live within this section of the ribbon, and we don't need to go looking elsewhere in the ribbon for tools that relate to rooms and room areas. So we have the architecture tab. Now, generally for architectural modeling and the work we're doing, the most common tabs you'll use are the architecture tabs, the annotate tab, which has all the tools relating to dimensioning and adding text and notes to your drawings. The view tab, which as the name implies contains tools that relate to creating views and changing views within Revit, and the modify tab at the end here. So those are probably the four that we use the most often, but we do tend to use the other ones for various things, perhaps just not as common or not as often. So if we flick back to the architecture tab, by looking at the icons for the tools themselves, all of these icons relate to tools, but you'll see that some of the icons are big with text underneath them. Some of the icons are smaller with text next to them. And if we flick over to some of the other tabs within the ribbon, some of the icons don't even have any text. They're small icons with no text associated to them. Now most of those live in the modify panel. You can see most of these icons here don't actually have any text available, but we can still see what they are by hovering over them. So again, as I said in the last video, if you hover over an icon in Revit, it initially pops up with its name, the two-letter code that relates to the keyboard shortcut, and if you hover over for a bit longer, you get an expanded view that shows more about how the tool works and how you can use the tool. Now in some icons that little expanded thing is a video, like it is in this case for the scale tool. Others are just a static visual display. So a lot of these have videos attached to them. But some of them don't, such as the wall tool. It just basically shows a graphic representation of a wall and how we create walls. So you see there are different sized icons, different types of icons, and different shaped icons, depending on how many there are grouped together, how much room Revit believes should be dedicated to those icons. So you can't always look for the big icons, because often you'll be using smaller ones, and some of these ones with no labels attached to them. You will get used to what the icons represent as you go through and use Revit more often, but as I say, the quickest way to find out is if you don't know what a tool or icon does, hover over it and it will tell you. So if we flick back to the architecture tab, you'll also note that some of the icons have a little arrow underneath them, a little downwards arrow. If we click on that arrow rather than the icon itself, we get a drop-down list of other tools that are available under that same icon. Now, currently, the icon or the image that's on the icon is the curved wall, which represents the architectural wall here. But we also have access to a structural wall, and we can draw a wall by face. You'll also notice there's two other options at the bottom here. These are both grayed out at the moment because we can't actually use those in the setup we've got currently. But again, all of these options you can hover over and it will give you a graphic representation of what each of those subtools does. So anywhere that you see a drop down arrow, you will find there are other options underneath that relate to the icon that you're looking at. So in this instance for roof, we have 6 different options for creating roofs within Revit. If we click on the icon itself without dropping the menu down, we will get whichever tool is available or default to that icon. If we wish to pick a different one, say I wanted to draw a roof by extrusion, I'd have to drop the menu down and click on that one rather than using the default tool up here. This icon here, if I click on it, will give me a roof by footprint. And I can tell that because that's the same symbol on the icon as is on that list. Sometimes Revit will actually change the symbol that's on the tool icon. For example, here we have, as I said, if we drop this down, the symbol that's on the icon is the roof by footprint. If we use the roof by extrusion tool often enough, Revit will start to realize that that's likely to be the next tool we want rather than a roof by footprint. And it will actually change the icon symbol to be this roof by extrusion symbol, and will change the default tool that you select by clicking on that icon to roof by extrusion. So Revit tries to keep track of how you use the ribbon and which tools are being used more often, and will actually modify the ribbon to suit your workflow. You'll also notice in the ribbon that not only do we have little drop down arrows underneath some of the icons, some of the subcategories also have drop down arrows underneath them. So this area here, the subcategory that relates to rooms and room areas, has a drop down. If we drop that down, we can see there's 2 other options available that we have by dropping that little menu down. We have color schemes and creating area and volume computations. So these aren't available by default in the ribbon, but by dropping the little arrow down here, you can access those other options. And some of the other subsections also have drop down arrows underneath them. That just means that there are more options available that you can click on and get access to them. You'll also notice some of the subsections, like text, has another little type of arrow in the corner that indicates a pop-out box. If I click on that box there, it opens up, get the reminder for saving, just cancel that. We get the properties for the text, pops out as a separate box. So when you see a little downward diagonal arrow instead of the drop down arrow here, it means that there is a separate box that will open up if you click on that arrow. So in this case, that's the text box. If I go back to so this subsection controls the way that views look. A lot of these commands are replicated down the bottom here that we covered in the last video. But if we click on the little fold out arrow here, we get a pop-up box, and this pop-up box is the graphic display options. This is the same box that we can access down the bottom here, and I showed you in the last video, but this controls the way the view can look and gives us more flexibility and options for controlling the look of the view. So if I close that, I can access exactly the same box through this direction as I showed you last time. So these little arrows here indicate there's a pop-out box available, which will give you more options or more control. So this is how the ribbon is laid out. We'll cover more the tools themselves and how they work later as we go through progressing the model. But this is the default layout of the ribbon, and I'm going to show you in a second how you can modify the ribbon to suit your workflow better and make some changes to the way the ribbon is laid out, and how it displays on the screen and how it works. So there is a bit of flexibility on how the ribbon works, and we can modify it to some degree to suit our own workflows. So the first thing to look at to do with the way the ribbon is laid out and the screen is laid out is this little icon at the end here of the View tab. So this is the user interface button or icon. If we click on it, we get a pop out, but we can drop the menu down here next to the side there, and we get a list of the windows that are open currently in the user interface. Now in the last video I talked about the project browser and the properties box. So these are both ticked at the moment and they're both visible on my screen. If I untick both of those boxes, they disappear off the screen. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where you can't find these two boxes, the project browser and the properties box, if you go to the View tab on the ribbon, drop down the user interface and just re-click those two little ticks there, and the two boxes should reappear either in the location where you last left them, or they'll reappear in the default location as they sit here currently. And it's actually surprisingly common to lose those two boxes. It's very easy just to accidentally hit the cross and they disappear, or to hide them off a screen or something like that. So this little button here is quite useful to get things back that you've lost. But if we want to change the way the ribbon's laid out and works, we've got a few options and a few things we can do to make it work better for us, or we can just leave it as default. But I'll show you how to modify the ribbon to make it slightly different, and you may find it works better for you, and you may want to make these changes. If you don't, you just get used to the ribbon as it is. I've always used the ribbon in its default state. I just learned where all the options are, and as I said, I also learned the keyboard shortcuts for a lot of the tools that I used often, so I didn't tend to use the ribbon that often. So the first change we can make to the ribbon is to actually turn off entire tabs across the top here. If we go into the File button, and we go down to the options that are available down the bottom here. Now we looked at this last time to look at setting the reminder time for our save. We click on Options, and we go into the User Interface section of this box. We can see at the top here we've got a menu with little tick boxes and a whole lot of tabs. These tabs relate to the tabs on the ribbon, and we can actually turn on and off the tabs that we don't want. We have really only options to turn off a few. Most of the tabs and icons that you're using fall within the Architecture tab and Tools, so we can't turn that off or split that up. We can turn it on or off completely, or we can leave it, and we can't actually adjust tabs within that set of tools. So having turned all those other tabs off, if I click OK, you'll see that we've lost a couple of tabs. We had a structural tab here, and a steel tab, and we've lost some of those tabs across the top. So it just simplifies the ribbon a little bit. If you find you don't use those other tabs, you can just turn them off. If you want to turn them back on again, do the reverse into the Options button, User Interface, and turn those back on. If you're curious what happens if you turn the architectural one off as well, if we go back into that, into User Interface, and we turn off the architectural tab, we lose a chunk of our tools. But we still have things like View and Manage and Insert, which are default tools within Revit, and we can't turn those on and off. So let's just turn that back to where it was, and I'll turn all the tabs back on again. So that's one way you can alter the ribbon to better suit your workflow. Go back to the Architecture tab. The next way we can modify the ribbon is we can actually move and reorder these tabs across the top. If you find that you're constantly using Architecture, Annotate, View, and Modify, and you want those to be closer together so it's easier to flick between them, if you hold down the Control key and grab the tab that you want to move, in this case Annotate, I can actually slide that tab sideways and put it between Architecture and Structure and drop it there. Similarly, if I want to move the View tab, I can bring that down as well. Locate that there, and the Modify tab I could also bring down there. So we now have the four tabs that we probably use more often next to each other, and we can actually access them pretty quickly. Again, if that works for you, fine, go with that, make the changes. You can always put them back again because you haven't actually changed the ribbon itself. All you've done is reorder the tabs that sit across the top of the ribbon. So you can always put them back again. Say I want to put the Modify tab back roughly to where it was. I can't remember exactly where it lives, but it's somewhere down there. We can do that any time, and we're not changing anything to do with the ribbon itself. We're just changing the order of the tabs. Now that change will save when you save the file in Revit, and it will become your default layout. So you're free to move any of these tabs around that you want to. Again, we also have the option to turn some of them off if we want to. So the combination of those two can actually make the tab layout a lot more streamlined and a lot simpler. The other way we can modify the ribbon that I'll show you is quite a big change or big departure from the way the ribbon is laid out. We can actually drag these subsections out of the ribbon. So at the moment we've got this build subsection with these tools in it, the circulation one, the model one. If I grab that circulation word and I pull it down, the menu pops out from the ribbon, the gap closes, and we get this little floating window with the tools on it. Now you'll see that the icons have actually changed slightly. They've changed size and layout, but they're still the same tools that were available in the ribbon. So this little floating box, if I hover over it for a second, I get two little grey panels, one on each side. The one on the left with the black dots is a handle. So if I move over to that, I can grab that and move it around and position it anywhere on the screen I like. The other grey panel at the very top has a little white upside down triangle, and that will return that panel back into the ribbon. So sometimes you might like to pull one of these tool sections out, subsections, to use for a while and put it back into the ribbon later, or you may actually decide you don't like the way the ribbon is laid out and you want to create your own little floating box with the tools that you need. So I've pulled one tool out, one set of tools here. If I grab another one, the model one, grab that and drag it out, again I can hover over that, grab the handle, move it around on the screen. If I move that with the handle up near the other one, you can see a box appears next to the tool that is there, and I can actually join these two tools together. And again, if I hover over it, I get two panels. So these two pieces of the ribbon are now linked together, and I can drag them around as I wish. And I can actually drag other pieces from other tabs into that. So say for example I want to grab the presentation subsection out of this ribbon, I can actually attach that to the end of that little mini ribbon there, and I can move this around. I can locate it up there, and it gives me quick access to those tools even if the ribbon is not available. I can actually also put those on a separate screen if I want to free up some drawing space, and then in a second I'll show you how, but we can then change the way the ribbon works so that it's not taking up so much space. Again, if we want to put those back in to the ribbon, we just click on this little arrow here, it returns the panels up into the ribbon, and they'll disappear from my screen and they go back into where they were on the main ribbon. So say for example I have this little circulation menu that I've created here, and I don't want the ribbon to take up so much room. The very right hand end of the tab line on the ribbon, we have this little box with an arrow in it and a drop down menu. If I drop that menu down, you can see we've got three options and one option that's ticked. So we can change the way the ribbon looks and how much space it takes up. Now the button to the left of that drop down cycles through the three options for the ribbon and the way it looks. So that's normally the quickest way to flick between the three options for the way the ribbon looks, or you can select them directly from this drop down menu here. So if I click on the button next to the drop down, it's called Minimise the Panels. If I click on that once, so you see that the ribbon has now changed and we've got these slightly larger icons that represent these subcategories within each ribbon. If I hover over that, you'll see the icons that live inside that build subsection now appear underneath, and I can access them and click on them and select those tools. If I move away, that little sub box pops back up and I'm left with just the main icons that represent the subsections of the ribbon. And I can hover over any of those and access the tools underneath. And these applies to the other tabs of the ribbon. We've gone back to a very simple looking ribbon, and we've got main subcategories that we can then access tools underneath. This is great if you mainly use keyboard shortcuts, because it actually takes a few seconds to hover, wait for the tool to open up and select the one you want. So it does actually take a little bit longer than having the full ribbon accessible. The next option, if we click on the button over here at the right hand end, is another modified version of the ribbon. This is very similar to the one we just had. We've lost the icons. We just have little drop down menus and tabs that represent the subsections of the ribbon itself. And again, we can hover over those subheadings and we get the pop out below with the tools that we're looking for. The next option, if we click on the button over here, is we lose those subheadings completely. So with this layout, we can access the tabs themselves. When we click on a tab, the tools underneath, or the icons that relate to that tab, appear. And this looks very similar to the first version of the ribbon we had. The difference is if I move away from that, those tools disappear up into the tabs So I have to go back up to the tab itself, click on it again to access any of the tools within that tab. I want to click the view, and I can cycle through the tabs while the icons are visible, and they'll stay visible, but as soon as I move away, they disappear. So this version of the ribbon takes up the least amount of room, and if you're very comfortable with using keyboard shortcuts, then this might be the version of the ribbon that you want available to look at, and access only when you need to. You'll notice through the process of changing the way the ribbon looks that this little floating box here that I created before has stayed there the whole time. So changes to the ribbon layout don't affect these floating boxes. So this is a way we can create little menus of tools that we use often separate from the ribbon, and then perhaps minimize the ribbon in a way that doesn't take up the screen real estate, and we can still access the tools if we need to. So if I go back up to the top here, and I can click on that little button that we've been using to cycle through the options for the ribbon, click on it again, and we're back to the main view of the default view of the ribbon. We still have our little floating box here, and I can still put that back into the main ribbon as well. So those are the ways we can change the way the ribbon looks and works to suit ourselves. All of the changes can be undone, so you can't actually do a lot of harm by changing the ribbon around and dragging these little boxes out, or moving the tabs around. They're all undoable things, and we still have access to all the tools in the ribbon at all times. So that's all I wanted to cover on the ribbon, but again, I would encourage you to also have a look around the ribbon, hover over the icons, see what they do, look at the descriptions, read the descriptions of all the icons and the tools, and where possible, remember or write down the 2-letter keyboard shortcuts. These are incredibly useful, and once you know 5 or 6 of them, it will completely change the way that you model in Revit. It'll speed things up dramatically.